The moment I pressed play, the silence was deafening. My husband's voice, filled with betrayal, echoed through the room. My mother-in-law stood frozen, and his mistress was in shock. It was over. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we'll dive into a gripping and emotional story about a woman who faces betrayal in her marriage, uncovering dark secrets that have been hidden for years. Have you ever experienced the feeling of being deceived or found yourself in a situation where everything you trusted crumbled? Stick around to see how the protagonist overcomes these challenges and takes back control of her life. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to give me the motivation to continue bringing you more compelling and meaningful stories. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening, the kind of evening that promised nothing more than a cup of tea, a good book, and the quiet hum of the world outside. But it wasn't peaceful. It was anything but. I stood at the doorway of my in-laws' estate, suitcase in hand, watching the sleek black SUV roll out of the driveway. Ethan, my husband, had just finished packing it. And as usual, his mother, Margaret, had nothing but disdain in her eyes. They were off to a lavish weekend getaway, leaving me to take care of his sister, Annabelle. The same Annabelle who, for the past 3 years, had been bedridden and mute, or so everyone thought. You'll take good care of her, right? Ethan's voice was cold, mechanical. No warmth, no affection, just a hollow command. I nodded, swallowing my frustration, but didn't say a word. There was nothing more to say. I had long since learned that in Ethan's world, I didn't have a voice. As the car roared to life and drove away, I felt a sinking feeling in my chest. This wasn't just another weekend alone with Annabelle. It was a reminder of everything I had given up, everything I had sacrificed. I had always been a shadow in this house, a mere accessory to Ethan's life, and now it seemed I was to be forgotten once again. I turned to Annabelle's room. She lay motionless in her bed, her brown eyes wide and unblinking. A pitiful sight, or so it seemed. I stepped forward to check on her, but then something happened that made my heart stop. Annabelle sat up. It wasn't the slow, groggy movements of someone waking up. No. She straightened up with purpose, stretching her arms above her head with a quiet grace. And then she turned to me with a smile. "Hi," she said, her voice light, playful. "How's it going?" I blinked in disbelief. "Annabelle, you can speak." She laughed softly, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Of course I can. I just didn't want anyone to know." My mind scrambled to catch up with her words. "You've been faking it all this time?" Annabelle shrugged casually. "Not exactly faking. More like playing a role. A very convincing one." The truth hit me like a ton of bricks, and for the first time in years. I felt a rush of emotions I hadn't anticipated. Annabelle, the fragile, mute sister-in-law I had spent so many years tending to, was not as helpless as she had appeared. And worse, she had been hiding it all along, pretending, playing a role. But why? Why would anyone fake such vulnerability? Annabelle slowly sat up, her movements graceful and deliberate, her legs swinging over the side of the bed. I watched, transfixed, as she stood up and stretched her arms above her head, unburdened, completely at ease in her own body. Her body wasn't broken. It was just hidden. She turned to me with a small, knowing smile, as if she had been waiting for me to catch up with her. "You've been wondering why I've kept up the act, haven't you?" she asked. Her voice soft but clear, the words cutting through the silence of the room like a sharp breeze. I nodded, still trying to process what was happening, feeling a mix of disbelief and confusion clouding my thoughts. Why? Why all these years? Why pretend? Her face softened for a moment, but then something darker flickered in her eyes. It was bitterness, resentment, years of hurt that had built up behind that quiet facade. Because it was the only way I could survive in this family. "You think they look down on you?" she asked, her gaze unwavering, almost daring me to challenge her. "Try being the daughter they never wanted." Her words hit me harder than I could have imagined. Annabelle wasn't just pretending to be weak, she had been strategically playing the part of the helpless, frail sister. She had been using her supposed disabilities as a shield to avoid the brutal, suffocating control of their mother, Margaret. The reality of it settled on me like a heavy weight. I thought about the years I had spent caring for her, trying my best to be kind and patient, to make up for what seemed like her unfortunate fate. I had watched her struggle, her inability to speak, her limp, her slumped posture, and I had believed it all. But now, seeing her standing here, so strong and unapologetically alive, the weight of those years felt like a lie I had been complicit in. I had always thought Annabelle was a helpless, fragile thing, someone who needed constant care and attention. But now, the truth was more complex. She had been hiding who she really was, and worse, I had been the one taking care of a ghost, giving my energy to someone who never needed it in the first place. I swallowed hard, my mind racing as I tried to reconcile this new version of Annabelle with the one I had believed in for so long. I don't understand. Why would you do this? Why pretend to be so weak? Annabelle let out a small sigh, her lips curling into a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Because, like I said, it was the only way to survive. They treated me like I didn't matter, like I was just a burden to be dealt with. If I hadn't played the role, they would have destroyed me. Margaret, she would have found a way to get rid of me. The more she spoke, the clearer the picture became. Annabelle's life hadn't been one of frailty and misfortune, it had been one of survival. Of playing a dangerous game where pretending was the only way to escape the crushing weight of family expectations and control. She took a step toward me, her eyes softening as if she were searching for some kind of understanding in my gaze. You've lived with Margaret long enough to know she's not a woman who deals in love, Annabelle continued. When I was a little girl, my real mother left. I barely remember her, but I remember the day she disappeared. One day she was there, and the next she was just gone. And that's when Margaret stepped in. But it was never about love. It was about power, about control. And for me, it was never about being loved. It was about surviving. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke, but she quickly regained her composure, folding her arms across her chest like armor. Margaret treated me like I was a problem. She never looked at me like I was worth anything. I became her burden to manage, her pet project. And the moment she took my mother's place, I knew I wasn't allowed to be anything but what she wanted me to be. To her, I was just another part of her collection of things, to be controlled, to be hidden away. A wave of anger rose inside me, an emotion I hadn't expected. I had always known something was off with Margaret, but I never realized the extent of her cruelty. She hadn't just controlled Annabelle physically. She had twisted her mind, her sense of self. Annabelle had spent her life pretending to be someone she wasn't, just to survive the suffocating grip of a woman who didn't see her as a person, but as an inconvenience. Annabelle wasn't the fragile, broken thing I had imagined her to be. She was smart. She was calculating. She was strong in her own way. But she had been forced to wear a mask for so long that I could barely recognize the woman standing before me now. So, you pretended to be weak to keep them off your back? I asked, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. My voice shook slightly as I processed the enormity of what Annabelle had done, and how I had been unknowingly complicit in it all. Annabelle smiled faintly, her eyes distant as if remembering a life that seemed so far removed from the one she was now living. Exactly, she said quietly. If they thought I was incapable, they'd leave me alone. And they did. It was easier this way. They ignored me. They stopped bothering me. It was the only way I could be left in peace. Her words hung in the air, heavy and full of truth. The truth that had been buried for so long, hidden behind her silence and her frailty. I felt a strange sense of guilt stir inside me, knowing that I had allowed myself to be blind to Annabelle's pain, to her true self. I had been so focused on trying to care for her, to protect her, that I had failed to see the strength that lay underneath. I had been taking care of the illusion of Annabelle, not the real woman who had been forced to live in the shadows. Annabelle's gaze softened, almost as if she could read my thoughts. You didn't know, she said, her voice gentle now. But now you do. And that's why I'm telling you everything. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I couldn't keep living a lie. I stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling the weight of her confession pressing down on me. Everything I thought I knew about Annabelle had been a lie she had crafted to protect herself from a family that never truly saw her. But now the truth was out. And for the first time, Annabelle was free. I stared at her, my mind still reeling. Annabelle, the fragile, mute sister-in-law I had spent so many years tending to, had been living a lie, our lie. But now, as the truth began to unravel, she was ready to take back her life, and she wanted me to help. This wasn't just about exposing Ethan. It was about reclaiming control over everything we had lost. "You're not the only one who's been deceived," Annabelle said, her voice calm, but her eyes were sharp. She stood up and began to gather her things from the room. Nothing too dramatic, just a sense of quiet determination in her movements. I watched as she folded her clothes with precision, each motion deliberate and focused. "Ethan's been hiding something too, and I think it's time to expose him. Margaret isn't the only one who's been manipulating people." I frowned, my heart pounding in my chest. I had expected a lot of things, but this? I wasn't prepared for this. "What do you mean?" Annabelle paused, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. A flash of bitterness and pain, something that went beyond her usual calm demeanor. She turned to face me fully, her expression serious, intense even, as though she had been carrying this burden for far too long. "Ethan's been unfaithful. For months, he's been seeing someone else. I know because I overheard their conversations. He's been planning to leave you for her, and he thinks you'll never find out." The words hit me like a slap to the face, the world around me tilting as if the ground had shifted beneath my feet. I was stunned. Ethan, my husband, the man I thought I could trust above all else, had been seeing another woman behind my back. And what's worse, he'd been planning to dispose of me when the time came, treating me like a part of his life that no longer fit. I stood frozen, trying to process what I had just heard. It didn't make sense. How could he do this? How could he be so cold, so calculating? Knowing the depths of our relationship, but the truth, as difficult as it was to accept, was right in front of me. Annabelle saw the disbelief on my face, and there was a flash of empathy in her gaze, but she quickly masked it with determination. I overheard them in the hallway once, late at night when I was supposed to be asleep. They thought I couldn't hear them. Ethan was telling her about his plans, how he was going to make everything seem perfect for you, so you wouldn't suspect anything, while he had his real life with her. I staggered back, feeling the weight of her words crush my chest. Ethan had been planning this for months. He had been living a double life, pretending to be the loving husband while secretly building a future with someone else. The realization was like a cold wind sweeping through me, and I couldn't seem to shake it. Annabelle took a step closer, her expression hardening. "We're going to confront him together," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "We'll expose the truth and make sure he pays for everything he's done." Her words stirred something deep inside me, something that had been buried beneath years of hurt and uncertainty. I didn't just want to confront Ethan, I needed to. I needed to know everything, to face him, to make him see the consequences of his betrayal. The thought of him lying to my face, pretending to be the man I loved while he was planning this, it filled me with a burning need for justice. "But how?" I asked, my voice shaky. "How do we even begin to do that? He's so careful. He's always one step ahead of me. He thinks he's untouchable." Annabelle's eyes narrowed slightly, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "That's where you're wrong. Ethan has always believed he could control everything, but he's been sloppy. He's been making mistakes, leaving traces behind. He thinks you're too trusting to notice, but I've seen everything. And now, so have you." She paused for a moment, clearly gathering her thoughts before continuing. "We don't need to just confront him. We need to outsmart him. We need to take everything he's been hiding and throw it back in his face. If we can get him to admit it, if we can get proof, he won't be able to escape the consequences. Margaret won't be able to protect him. He'll have no choice but to face what he's done." The plan began to take shape in my mind, and as it did, I felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. The idea of taking control was foreign to me, but with Annabelle's guidance, it felt possible. We would need to be careful, strategic. Ethan wouldn't go down without a fight. "What do we do first?" I asked, my voice steadier now, fueled by a growing determination. Annabelle began to explain the next steps. "We start small, but we build the case. We start with his habits, his routines, his phone, his emails. We need to find something concrete, something that he can't deny. If we get his phone records, we can prove who he's been calling. We can find evidence of the affair." She paused, looking at me with an intensity that made me realize how much she had been planning this all along. "I've already started. I've been watching him. I know where he hides his phone. He's been sneaking around, thinking no one's watching, but I've been there. We just need to keep gathering more." The plan was simple, but it required precision and patience. We would take Ethan's carefully curated life and strip it away piece by piece, exposing him for the liar he was. But as Annabelle spoke, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. This wasn't just about exposing Ethan anymore. It was about destroying everything he had built, the family, the facade, the life that he had manipulated me into believing was perfect. And in doing so, we were also destroying ourselves in a way. Because once the truth came out, there would be no going back. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. "I'm ready," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Let's do it." Annabelle gave me a sharp nod, her gaze steady and unflinching. "Good. We do this together and we do it right." With that, we set the plan into motion. Knock knock. Now you're about to watch the best part of the story. But before that, make sure to subscribe to my channel so we can keep going together. The plan was set. Annabelle and I would go to the exclusive resort where Ethan and Margaret had planned their getaway, a luxurious hideaway far from the prying eyes of the world. This place was meant to be their sanctuary, an escape from the realities of life, where they could be free to continue their deceit without fear of being discovered. But now, it would become the stage for our confrontation. We were on the edge, both of us. I could feel the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on me like a heavy fog. The closer we got to the resort, the more my anxiety mounted. I had spent so many years pretending everything was fine, ignoring the cracks in my marriage. But now, the truth was screaming to be heard. And this was the moment when it would all come crashing down. As we approached the resort, the first thing I noticed was how pristine and flawless everything looked. The grand entrance, the lush greenery, the sparkling fountains. It all seemed almost too perfect. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the sound of soft classical music playing in the background. It was as if we had stepped into a world that wasn't real. A world carefully crafted to shield its inhabitants from the harshness of reality. It felt like a stage, designed to keep the world at bay. A place where secrets could thrive without consequence. But I knew better now. This place was about to bear witness to something no one expected. Walking through the entrance, my heart was pounding in my chest. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Annabelle squeezed my hand, offering a silent gesture of support. We were both nervous but determined. The weight of our plan, the weight of the truth, hung heavily between us. But I knew we had come too far to turn back. We found Ethan sitting at a table in a secluded corner of the restaurant, surrounded by the high-end luxury that had always been his comfort zone. Beside him sat Margaret, his ever-present partner in crime. But it was the woman sitting next to them that sent a jolt of anger through my veins. She was younger, beautiful, and too close to Ethan for comfort. She laughed too easily at his jokes, touched his arm a bit too casually, as if she had every right to be there. The sight of them together twisted my stomach in a knot, a mix of disgust and disbelief swirling inside me. I tried to steady my breath, but it felt as though my chest was constricting. Annabelle squeezed my hand again, harder this time. "Now's our chance," she whispered. Her voice steady but laced with the same tension I felt. I nodded, the sense of urgency mounting. This was it. There would be no turning back now. We walked over to the table. Ethan's face lit up with his usual arrogant grin when he saw us approach. But there was a flicker of confusion in his eyes, just for a second, before he masked it with the same practiced charm. Margaret gave us a cool, uninterested glance, barely acknowledging our presence, as if we were nothing more than annoyances to be dealt with. The mistress, on the other hand, stared at us with wide eyes, her expression shifting from curiosity to something else, a fleeting moment of realization that she didn't understand what was happening. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat louder than the next. My hands were clammy, but I held my composure. As we reached the table, I took a deep breath, and without hesitation, I reached into my bag and pulled out the recording device Annabelle had secretly planted earlier. The moment it was in my hand, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, as if holding the device gave me the strength to do what I had been avoiding for so long, to expose the truth. "Excuse me, Ethan," I said, my voice calm but steely, each word deliberate and controlled. "We need to talk." The shock on his face was immediate and priceless. His expression faltered, his lips parted in surprise as he processed what was happening. He had no idea what was coming. The room seemed to still. The once bustling sounds of dinner conversations and clinking glasses faded into the background as I pressed play on the recording device. The words that spilled out of it filled the air like a slap to the face, too real to ignore. Ethan's voice, dripping with arrogance, filled the space between us. "I'll file for divorce soon. She won't see it coming. Once it's done, I'll make sure she gets nothing." Time seemed to freeze. Margaret's face turned white as a ghost, her lips trembling, but she didn't speak. The mistress glanced from Ethan to me, her eyes darting back and forth in confusion until realization slowly dawned on her. Her expression shifted from one of naive curiosity to horror as the truth unfolded before her eyes. Ethan's smugness evaporated. He opened his mouth, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. Stammering, unable to form the sentences that once came so easily to him. The room was heavy with silence now, the only sound coming from the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Ethan looked like he had just been hit by a freight train. His confidence was gone, replaced by a mixture of panic and anger. He turned his gaze to me, eyes wide with disbelief. How did you get that?" His voice shook slightly, a sharp contrast to the smooth tones he always used. I stood there, watching the great facade of Ethan crumble before my eyes. The man who had built his life on lies, who had convinced everyone around him that he was the perfect husband, the perfect son, was now exposed. And it felt right. It felt like the weight of years of betrayal, manipulation, and deceit was finally lifting. But that wasn't enough for me. No, it wasn't just about exposing him anymore. It was about making sure he understood the full weight of his actions. I wasn't going to let him walk away from this unscathed. Not this time. "That's just the beginning, Ethan," I said. My voice steady now, no trace of the trembling I felt inside. "You've been living a lie for so long, thinking no one would ever catch on. But now everyone will know the truth. And you will face the consequences of everything you've done." Ethan looked at me, his eyes flickering with a mix of fury and disbelief. He opened his mouth to respond. But before he could get a word out, Margaret cut him off. "You can't," she started, but her voice was weak, almost pleading, and for the first time in my life, I saw her look vulnerable. It was almost pathetic. The mistress, now fully aware of the situation, stood up abruptly, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "How could you do this to me?" she spat, her voice trembling. "I didn't know you were married. I didn't know." I looked at her, the same disgust I had felt earlier rising again. "You knew exactly what you were doing. Don't play the victim now." The tension in the room was palpable, thick with the realization that everything was coming apart for Ethan. He was no longer the man in control. He was the man exposed. The man whose lies had unraveled in front of everyone. But there was something else in his eyes now, something that wasn't fear. It was desperation. He knew he was cornered. But there was still a part of him that thought he could weasel his way out of this. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You're making a huge mistake." I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what was to come. "The only mistake I made," I said, my voice cutting through the tension, "was trusting you." And with that, I knew that everything had changed. Ethan had lost, and there was no going back. The recording finished, and the silence in the room was deafening. It was as if the world had stopped, holding its breath in anticipation. Ethan's face drained of color, his once cocky, arrogant expression completely gone. His eyes widened, mouth slightly agape as he realized what had just happened. For the first time in years, I saw him truly vulnerable, a man caught in his own web of lies. It was almost poetic. Margaret's grip on her wine glass tightened, her knuckles turning white. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The shock was evident in her rigid posture, the way her eyes darted between me and Ethan, as though she was still processing the reality of what was unfolding. The tables had turned, and I could see the power dynamic shift as Ethan, the man who had always been in control, realized there was no way out. The mistress stood up, her face flushed with anger, her expression now a mixture of confusion and betrayal. She had been so sure of her position, so confident in her relationship with Ethan. But now the veil was lifted, and the reality of his deception hit her full force. "You're married," she snapped, her voice tinged with disbelief and disgust. "And you're planning to ditch her? Wow, you really are a piece of work." I smiled, a small, cold smile. It wasn't one of satisfaction, but rather one of quiet triumph. For the first time, I felt the weight of the years of manipulation lift off my shoulders. The years of pretending, of sacrificing my own happiness for the illusion of a perfect marriage, it was all fading away. I was standing on my own 2 feet, ready to face whatever came next. "Not anymore," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "We're getting a divorce, Ethan. And you'll pay for everything." The words felt like a declaration of independence. An exclamation of the life I was about to reclaim. I had spent so long letting him call the shots, so long letting him dictate my worth, my happiness, my future. But not anymore. This was my moment. Margaret, still in shock, grabbed my arm, trying to protest. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice trembling with panic. "You can't just..." But I yanked my arm away from her. The anger and frustration I had been holding back for years flooding to the surface. "No more second chances, Margaret," I said firmly, my tone cutting through the air like a blade. "You've been playing games for too long. It's time to end this." For a moment, I could see the flicker of something in Margaret's eyes. A realization that her influence, her control had crumbled. There was nothing she could do now. The lies, the manipulation, it all unraveled right before her eyes. And there was no way she could fix it. Not this time. As the hotel staff moved in to escort Ethan out of the room, he stood up quickly, his face twisted in desperation, his body tense with fury. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice thick with anger and fear. "You think you've won? You don't know what you're doing. You'll regret this." His words had no weight. They were nothing more than the last remnants of a man who had no control, no power left. He was sinking, drowning in his own self-destruction, and I was no longer afraid. I stood tall facing him, my heart still pounding but my resolve stronger than ever. But as I watched him being dragged away, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just relief, it was a sense of empowerment. A sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in years. Ethan had tried to control my life, to break my spirit. But he had failed. And in that moment, I knew I would never regret taking control of my own life. I had fought back and I had won. Weeks later, the divorce was finalized. The process was swift, almost anticlimactic. Ethan, too caught up in his own self-destruction, barely put up a fight. His once confident demeanor had completely unraveled. There was no grand battle, no dramatic courtroom scenes, just a man who had lost everything. It was all over for him and there was nothing he could do about it. He had dug his own grave and now he was lying in it all alone. Annabelle, now free from the shackles of her family, moved to a new city to start fresh. The quiet, reserved woman I had once known as fragile was blossoming into someone strong. Someone who had fought for her own survival and was now ready to live her life on her own terms. I knew she would find her place in the world, and I would be cheering her on from afar. She had been my ally, my friend, and I had no doubt she would find peace. As for me, I learned to trust myself again. For so long, I had looked to others, Ethan, Margaret, society, for validation. I had been living for everyone else, for the version of me that others wanted me to be. But now, I had no one to answer to but myself. The freedom was intoxicating. I no longer needed Ethan's approval. I no longer needed Margaret's control. I was free. Free from the chains that had bound me, free from the lies I had lived. I could breathe again. I could live again. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Not just existing, but living, truly living. I had the power to create my own future, to make my own decisions, and to find my own happiness. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that I was the one who had the final say in my life. What do you think about the story? Feel free to share your thoughts or leave any comments or feedback below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next exciting chapter. Thank you for staying with me until the end of the story. And I can't wait to bring you more captivating tales in the future.